Hello everyone. Welcome back. Today, we've got some crucial news you don't want to miss. Let's dive right into the top financial headlines and break down what's happening. As the US presidential election approaches, Wall Street is paying closer attention to its developments and possible outcomes. Today, Investing published an interesting report with the headline, 57% of wealthy investors plan to vote for VP Harris, while 43% favor Trump, survey. The report goes on to say that, according to a recent UBS survey, the majority of wealthy investors plan to support Vice President Harris in the upcoming election. The poll was conducted among investors with at least $1 million in investable assets. The survey also revealed that 91% of Democratic voters support Harris, while only 9% favor Trump. Meanwhile, among Republicans, 88% back Trump. As for independents, Harris holds a slight edge. For these investors, the economy remains the most pressing issue, with 84% listing it as their top concern. Other significant issues include Social Security, 71%, immigration, 68%, and taxes, 69%. There's a notable divide among investors regarding who they believe is better equipped to handle the economy. 51% think Trump is more capable, while 49% side with Harris. Among business owners, a separate UBS survey showed that most prefer Trump, with 53% planning to vote for him, compared to 47% for Harris. Much like wealthy investors, these business owners rank the economy as their number one priority, followed by taxes, healthcare, Social Security, and immigration. In terms of optimism, wealthy investors are more positive about the US economy and their investment portfolios than they were 4 years ago. For instance, 55% of respondents said they are optimistic about the US economy in 2024, up from 43% in 2020. Business owners are also reporting increased confidence, with 65% feeling optimistic about the economy, compared to 55% in 2020. Both groups are preparing for potential changes, with 77% of wealthy investors considering adjusting their portfolios ahead of the election, a jump from 63% 4 years ago. According to the UBS survey, the most anticipated changes include shifting sector allocations, increasing portfolio protection or hedging, expanding investments, and boosting cash reserves. It's important to note that while this survey offers insights into the views of investors and business owners, these groups make up a small fraction of the US electorate. Wall Street is keen on these findings because they directly impact their interests. However, whether these opinions represent the majority of American voters is up for debate. Still, the report provides a glimpse into where investors and business owners are focusing their attention as the election nears, along with the strategies they're considering in response to the possible outcomes. In fact, one of the hottest topics on Wall Street right now is the economic plan recently introduced by Vice President Harris, which has sparked widespread debate and discussion. The second key news story to share today comes from Bloomberg, with the headline, US-EU near deal on $50 billion Ukraine aid using Russian assets. The subheading reads, amount of US participation depends on EU sanction reform. The report explains that the US has informed the EU that if the G7, Group of 7, moves forward with planned adjustments to make sanctions against Russia more predictable, the US will contribute $20 billion to the G7-led aid package for Ukraine. Even if the EU doesn't make changes to its sanctions regime, the US will still contribute to the $50 billion package, though the amount would be smaller. For context, back in June, the G7 agreed in principle to provide non-repayable loans to Ukraine. These loans would be repaid using the profits generated from Russia's frozen central bank assets, estimated to total around $280 billion, most of which is held in Europe. A US official mentioned that Washington fully intends to participate in the $50 billion aid commitment to Ukraine, but the final contribution will depend on whether the EU can ensure that Russia's assets remain frozen. Initially, the US and EU had each agreed to contribute $20 billion to the aid package, but Washington later urged the EU to establish a more permanent sanctions regime to ensure the fund's availability, as EU sanctions need to be renewed every 6 months. So, why hasn't the EU fulfilled this request from the US, or implemented the G7's decision on using profits from Russian assets? The main obstacle is Hungary, which has been blocking EU efforts to use these funds for Ukraine by exercising its veto power. In essence, if Hungary doesn't allow it, the EU's money won't come through, and consequently, neither will the US contribution. However, today's news suggests that the US and the EU have reached a preliminary agreement, with the EU signaling that they have a way to bypass Hungary and proceed with the plan to use the profits from Russian assets to aid Ukraine. Yet, the US has left some room for doubt, essentially saying, if you can make good on your promise, then we'll follow through. The US also emphasized that even if the EU can't resolve the issue with Hungary, it will still use Russian assets under its control to support Ukraine, but the total aid amount will be less than initially pledged. This move clearly adds pressure on the EU, and it highlights the complexities within the EU structure, especially when dealing with member states like Hungary. Whether this aid will ultimately go through remains uncertain, despite the positive signals of a preliminary agreement. We'll need to keep a close watch on this situation as it develops. The third important news story also comes from Bloomberg, with the headline, "Zelensky faces Trump challenge after snub on US trip." The report highlights how Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is anticipating the potential challenges he might face if Trump returns to office. During his trip to the US, Zelensky will not be meeting with Trump, despite previously expressing interest in holding talks with him. Instead, Zelensky has been focused on other engagements, including a visit with President Biden to a munitions plant in the swing state of Pennsylvania. In an interview, Zelensky questioned Trump's repeated claims that he could quickly end the war through negotiations, which has further distanced him from the Republican camp. Recently, Trump took a swipe at Zelensky during a campaign event in North Carolina, criticizing the Ukrainian leader. After delivering a speech at the United Nations, where he harshly criticized China's role in the war, Zelensky is set to present his victory plan to Biden later today. Meanwhile, political maneuvering ahead of the November election is also taking place in Europe. Trump's son has been sharing Republican campaign messages in Serbia and Romania, claiming that Trump's return to the White House would bring significant benefits to Eastern Europe. This news underscores the widening public rift between Trump's camp and Ukraine, making the tensions and disagreements increasingly visible. The fourth key news story, which is making headlines in the US today, involves a major political development. This is being reported by The Economist, a publication known for its relatively objective stance, as it's based outside the US. The headline reads, "Eric Adams, New York's mayor, is indicted on bribery charges." Unfortunately, New Yorkers are all too familiar with scandals in City Hall. The report recounts Adams' difficult past. At 15 years old, he was arrested and beaten by a police officer. This experience motivated him to join the police force, where he eventually rose to a top-ranking position before transitioning into politics. He used this personal story as part of his campaign when running for mayor in 2020. However, after nearly 4 years in office, Mayor Adams' future looks uncertain. He is now facing federal criminal charges and could be arrested once again. While the indictment remains sealed, it's widely believed that it involves several ongoing investigations surrounding City Hall and Adams' inner circle. Federal investigators have already confiscated the phones of several close advisors, including 2 deputy mayors. Adams' own phone was seized back in November of last year. There's speculation that Adams might be charged with acting as an unregistered foreign agent after allegedly receiving donations from foreign sources, including Turkey. The FBI is also reportedly investigating whether Adams pushed for the expedited opening of a new Turkish consulate, despite unresolved security concerns. Mayor Adams has denied all allegations, stating that any charges against him are completely false and based on lies. If Adams is removed from office or resigns, the city's public advocate, Jumaine Williams, would automatically become the acting mayor and would then have the authority to set a date for a special election. Unfortunately, scandals like this are nothing new for New Yorkers. Adams has faced public scrutiny for his actions even before these criminal allegations surfaced. For example, after taking office, he tried to appoint his brother, a former parking lot security guard, to a high-ranking advisory role overseeing the NYPD with a $280,000 annual salary. Public backlash forced him to back down from the appointment, but it revealed a troubling level of greed and favoritism. While the current charges don't appear to involve ties with China, it's no secret that Adams has maintained close connections with China in the past. Our final major news story, also from The Economist, focuses on Japan's upcoming leadership transition. The question on everyone's mind: who will become Japan's next prime minister? With three leading candidates, each offering starkly different visions for the country, tomorrow's election will decide the new head of the Liberal Democratic Party, LDP, who will also become Japan's next prime minister. Before the election, The Economist compares the three main contenders, giving us a glimpse into Japan's political future. The first candidate is Shinjiro Koizumi, a 43-year-old rising star who would become Japan's youngest post-war leader. Koizumi keeps a photo of another charismatic young leader, John F. Kennedy, in his office. He is the son of former Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi, a reformist who led the country from 2001 to 2006. Following in his father's footsteps, Koizumi supports progressive reforms, including changes to Japan's marriage laws to allow couples to keep separate surnames. However, his inconsistent performance during the debates has raised doubts about his readiness, particularly on foreign policy, where he lacks experience. Next up is Sanai Takeichi, whom The Economist describes as a far-right nationalist. If elected, Takeichi would be Japan's first female leader. She's an admirer of former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and claims to be the ideological successor to the late Shinzo Abe, Japan's former Prime Minister who was assassinated in 2022. Her hardline positions could provoke China and strain efforts to reconcile with South Korea. Takeichi advocates for expansionary fiscal and monetary policies, but shows less enthusiasm for Abe's structural reforms, arguably the most crucial aspect of his economic policy legacy. The third candidate is Shigeru Ishiba, whom The Economist portrays as an eccentric elder statesman making his fifth bid for the LDP leadership. Ishiba's mentor was Kakue Tanaka, a post-war political heavyweight who was eventually brought down by a corruption scandal. Known as the Commoner's Prime Minister for his commitment to poor rural areas, Tanaka's influence still shapes Ishiba's populist appeal. Ishiba's decades-long grassroots campaigning have made him a public favorite in opinion polls, but many within his party view him as a traitor for his defection from the LDP in the 1990s. Regardless of who wins on the 27th, The Economist notes that Japan's new prime minister will immediately face significant domestic and international challenges. The new leader must manage tense relations with China, forge a relationship with the US president, and guide the LDP through upcoming parliamentary elections. They'll also have to control what's described as a fractious party, where internal disagreements frequently lead to leadership changes. Any missteps could trigger yet another round in Japan's revolving door of prime ministers. The Economist suggests that none of the three candidates appear likely to stabilize Japan's political situation in the long run. The article leans towards Sanai Takeichi, giving her more attention than the other two contenders, though it also hints that all three might be transitional figures. The piece closes by reflecting on the unpredictability of Japan's political landscape and whether any of these candidates can truly bring stability. In my personal opinion, I also hope Sanai Takeichi wins. We'll know the outcome tomorrow, but The Economist raises an interesting point: even after this election, Japan may still face political turbulence. None of these candidates seem capable of managing both their party and the country as effectively as someone like Abe did. That's all for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more updates. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.